Good evening, Facebook family and YouTube family. Thank you for another wonderful evening session with Brian and Janice. We are delighted that you decided to join us today, and we want to shed some light again to you on this beautiful Sunday evening. I pray that everybody has had a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and do pray that you have a wonderful week. We have been doing this show for almost a year now, and I hope that you all are going back, looking at some of the shows that we've done in the past to further educate and enlighten yourself on African American history and what has happened to African Americans in the past. Today we're going to talk about some of those things with Brian and I as to what has taken place and what has really hurt African Americans throughout history up until today. As you know, as of even today, we are still dealing with issues with Black Americans. We are fighting still for reparations. We are fighting for social justice. We are fighting for equal pay. We're fighting for equal rights. Everything we're fighting for, we've been fighting for 200 plus years. So what I want to encourage you today, try to get as much history and as much knowledge from this program as you possibly can. We spend a lot of time researching, studying. Brian has done an awesome job with history. For over 20 years, he has studied history and theology, and he is well equipped to inform us, to give us facts on what has happened to Black Americans, African Americans, throughout history up until today. So without further ado, we will get started with today's show, and I bring you again my wonderful Brian Derek Watts.
Well, good evening, Facebook family. Good evening, YouTube family. As Janice have said, we want to talk to you briefly about it. We apologize for running a little bit late. Had to get some things in order. But we want to just kind of talk to you about some of the things that have hurt us in the past. Now, we could go through a litany of things, but we're going to isolate it today. Initially, we were going to talk about 10 things that have probably affected Black people the most as it relates to from a historical aspect. But we're going to try to isolate that down and talk about just components of those 10 things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the first things that we have to discuss that is in every discussion when it comes to Black people in America is slavery. Okay, that is a discussion that is oftentimes avoided, especially by the United States government, especially by our officials in the city government, in state government, on the state level, on a city level, on a county level, and particularly on a federal level. And I think we have to begin to question, why is the subject of slavery avoided? Yes. Why doesn't the officials of the government want to talk about slavery? Slavery is known historically as America's sin. Yes. Okay? And whenever you deal with slavery from a faction of having to look into the ills of slavery that have affected 2 to 3 to 4 generations of people, then you have to start talking about how to make those people whole. Okay, you cannot have a discussion about slavery and the effects of slavery as it relates to the generations that have come who after those that were enslaved. Mm-hmm. We are the descendants.
Yes, we are.
Of those enslaved Africans that were brought over here. Not only Africans, we could talk about the Native Americans that mixed with some of the Africans, the children of the natives that were here prior to the Africans being brought here. So we can look at it from a broad range, but the simple fact is that we have to deal with this sin, and our United States government has to tackle the fact that slavery was a U.S. government complicit sanction for the mistreatment of human beings
Yes.
in this country. We have to deal with that.
Yes.
Listen, this week I've looked at Biden's, have read, if you go to whitehouse.gov, you can read everything that he wants to implement in his first 100 days. Let me just stop. I'm going to pause right there, then we're going to get back. Okay, look, the first 100 days concept comes from FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration, his first administration in 1933. Okay, basically what happens is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt takes office, he begins to sign executive orders, executive order after executive order after executive order, as it relates to trying to bring the United States back to a place to where the economy is once again productive, and those people that were in the economy, particularly white, okay, would be put back into the class, as it relates, when I say class, back into the middle class slot. Okay. So meaning that these white people that were unemployed during the Great Depression, coming out of the Great Depression, part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's job when he took office was to make sure he not only boost the economy, but one way to boost the economy was to get the American people working again.
Yes.
Now, a lot of his administrative policies did not benefit black people. Thank God that we had black people in position when we talk about leadership, such as Mary McLeod Bethune,
Yes.
who at that time was the national director for the youth services. Okay, she was responsible for making sure that black youth was included in the process of getting jobs.
Yes.
We had people such as A. Philip Randolph, okay, that actually threatened Delano Franklin Roosevelt and told him, if you do not include black people as it relates to jobs in the military, that we will march on your Washington, D.C., and we would tear it down, literally. But these were leaders back then that fought for what was due to black people. So, like I said, that's just a caveat into understanding that whenever we deal with slavery, we have to deal with restitution and we have to deal with reparations. Okay? We cannot excuse the fact that slavery has caused black people major problems. Okay? One of the problems that we often deal with in our community is economics. Okay, so let's deal with that just for a second. Let's talk about what slavery did as it relates to economics. We got to understand that the whole process of being brought from another continent that was rich in resources, okay?
Right.
Africa was not the backwards place
that they're making
that Europeans taught us in history. We have to understand that. We have to understand that it is the only continent that is resource rich enough to sustain itself. It doesn't need anything else coming into it to sustain itself. Africa could literally take care of itself without any imports coming in. It has everything it needs to sustain itself by way of that land. It is resource rich. So we have to understand that these Africans that were brought here by way of slave ship, those that survived, was assimilated into a system that took them out of a resource rich continent, placed them in a new settlement, okay? in a new country that had to be developed, had resources, but also had to be developed in order to experience wealth. Okay, so when we talk about economics, we have to look at the fact that without the labor of the African person that was bought from a resourceful, rich continent, knowing how to farm, knowing how to build, the settlement called America, this country, would not exist.
Exactly, Brian.
In the format that it does today.
Exactly.
It would not have grown to become
the country that it is today.
The superpower that it is. Okay, even now, even though it's not the main superpower anymore.
Right.
Okay, but at one time, America was the bully on the block, so to speak. Okay, it was the end all be all.
Yes.
When it came to having wealth, when it came to supposedly other countries following the example as it's set concerning democracy and government. Okay, so we have to talk about what happened to those African people. Okay, we can go through many documents that gives us some indication of what they experienced by way of slavery. Okay, this country cannot denote the fact that the brutality of slavery, okay, some of the terroristic acts that were done to the slave follows the children of the slaves even until this day.
Yes.
Economically, we are still depressed.
Yes.
Why? Because 100% of the wealth that was made off of the back of the slave by way of the slave's labor was never given back in some portion, in some way, never given back to the descendants of those slaves that worked and labored for absolutely no type of compensation. Okay, so 100% of the wealth was that from the slave laborers went directly to the slave master and the slave master's descendants. Okay, so why is it important? People will say this all the time, and you'll hear this. People will say, well, that happened in the past.
Oh my. Okay,
if you talk to white people, that this is the number one thing that America doesn't want to acknowledge, and their excuse for it is that happened 200-300 years ago. Okay, yes, it may have happened 200 to 300 years ago, but the fact remains that what was made 203 years ago, 200 to 300 years ago, by way of the slave's labor, is still feeding your children and your grandchildren today.
And great-grandchildren.
Okay, so if you don't want to deal with the fact, okay, that 200, 300 years ago this was passed, then you need to give back all of the land, okay, by way of it being the past. You need to give back all of the royalties that were made from the slaves.
That's right, Brian.
That you're still taking advantage of, that you're still experiencing, that's still in your family's banks, okay, in the land that you're still walking on, that your great-great-grandfather owned, that slaves labor cultivated and made you all what would equate today to millions of dollars. Then if it's just the past, then you need to give all of that, needs to go back to the government. Okay,
because that's past.
That's past. It's all past resources. So that's right. That still affects us today. Okay, so we have to. America has to deal with the ugly fact. Okay, that slavery has affected the well-being or the status of the American African today. Okay? And we have to look that first sin in the eye, and as a country, okay? Because we're still, African people are still not a part of this America, and I'm going to keep saying that until the light comes on and we really realize that we're not part of this America. Okay? We have been assimilated into a system. We have been adopted into a system. Okay? We are still not what they would consider to be full-fledged citizens. We are still in some way slaves to the governmental system that was put in place to control a people so that the U.S. government could prosper off of the people that it controlled. Okay? We are still slaves to a system that was constructed to eternally keep us slaves. Okay? So, in saying that, we have to look at the methodology behind slavery. We have to look at what happened to black people as it relates to slavery. We have to understand that the government was complicit because slavery could not have taken place if it was not sanctioned by the United States government, if it was not approved by the United States government. And then we have to look at what do we do to correct it. Okay? The United States must, if nothing else Biden do in his administration, he needs, and Kamala needs to make sure that this issue is addressed beyond anything else that is done for African black people that are in this country who are the descendants of slaves. Okay? Now, I've read Biden's first 100 days. Like I said, you can go to whitehouse.gov and you can read that. Like I said, the first 100 days concept comes out of FDR first 3 months, where he enacted multiple executive orders to deal with the Great Depression and the fallout of the Great Depression from the Hoover administration. Okay? So we have to go back and we have to understand that if Biden is going to make a difference in his first 100 days, this is one thing that needs to be on the table. Now, family, when you go and read his first 100 days and what he wants to do and some of the executive orders that have been signed, not one time is there a mention of the mistreatment of black people being acknowledged in this country. There is the mention of the Pacific Islanders and of the Hispanic.
Yes.
There is a mention of other diversity groups such as LGBTQ. Okay. There's the mention of colored people, which is a designation that is different from black people. Okay. Colored people does not fall into the same category as blacks, being, when we say black, okay, we're referring to those who are indigenous to this country. And not only indigenous, we're referring to those that are the descendants of slaves. Okay, so when you talk about, when I say an indigenous African person, I'm talking about the ones that were brought over here as well as the natives, the ones that were brought over here by way of slave ships. Okay, when you read his policies
for the first 100 days,
for the first 100 days, you see a mention of every group except black people. You see the Asian, you see the Pacific Islanders, you see the Hispanic, you see the colors, you see diversity groups, different diversity groups, but no mention of black people. Okay? None. So with all of the rhetoric surrounding Black Lives Matter, with all of the political hoopla, now because Black Lives Matter, when you study it, has become a political machine by way of funneling money to certain things that they feel are important to deal with by way of the black community, i.e. or number one, police brutality or criminal justice reform. That is what they are focusing on more than anything, even though they're saying that they want to deal with every injustice concerning black people. Not one time is that mentioned anywhere in his policies in the first, with what he's doing in the first 100 days. Every other group is mentioned. Like I said, I'm going to keep reiterating this, except black people. With all of the political hoopla, with all of the painting of the streets, and the logos of Black Lives Matters being painted on Washington, and now Black Lives Matters got a building in Washington, all of this thing, millions of dollars are being funneled through Black Lives Matter organization, but there's nothing in the policies about black people. That tells me everything that I need to know as it relates to what this administration planned on doing concerning reparations as it relates to the descendants of slaves. There was no apology. Now, and granted, Clinton gives a half-baked apology, okay? But Clinton's policies damaged black people worse than any other administration in the last 100 years. And I will go on record, even worse than Reagan, okay? Because Clinton's policies were a continuation of the Reagan administration on steroids, okay? And I can prove that to you because it's in black and white.
Yes.
We can talk about those policies. NAFTA, the 3 strikes law, No Child Left Behind,
yes.
welfare reform.
Yes.
All of those policies were directly
out of the Clinton administration.
Yes, and not only that, directly attached to black people and directly attached to the detriment of black people. NAFTA took away millions of jobs, and out of those millions, thousands upon thousands of black people were affected more than any other group.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, they were.
The welfare reform system affected black children more than any other group that was affected. Okay? 3 strikes law put more incarcerated. The incarceration population went from thousands to 100,000. Being black men being brought into the system by the groves for minor misdemeanor crimes of marijuana. And the 3 strike law, they get caught with marijuana 3 times. They were given life sentences for misdemeanor crime. Clinton's policies did more, our so-called, that we herald as the first black president because he played a saxophone. I play a saxophone, okay? I'm going to run for president. Keep that in mind. But the black, we herald him as the first black president, but did not hold him to any standard as it relates to doing something positive for the black community, okay? So his administration, we are still dealing with the effects of that, okay? We have to look at Biden's first 100 days, and we have to look at it with a critical eye. And we have to let our voices be heard. Okay? We need to call senators. We need to do emailing. I say this a lot.
Yes, you do.
Because I want you to understand that in order to get something done in politics, it is the person with the loudest voice that's heard.
It's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil.
Or the squeaking wheel that gets the oil. And we have to squeak the loudest because there are a lot of squeaking wheels. There are a lot of voices, right?
They are.
So it is the voice that is heard the loudest that actually gets some attention. Okay? So going back to this, There's nothing to deal with the slave descendants in his policies that would help us directly. Everything that is in his first 100 days deals with black people on an indirect basis. What do you mean, Brian, when you say indirect basis? When I say indirect basis, it deals with us as being the afterthought, and we receive the leftovers, if you will,
Yes.
from those policies that directly affect the Pacific Islanders, the Asians, the Hispanics, the diversity groups, okay, the colored people. We are receiving basically nothing coming from those tables that may happen to trickle down into our community. You understand? So we have to, black people, begin to realize that sometimes it's not all about, because like I said last week, Democrat and Republican, they're the same. There is no difference, okay? Donald Trump was an enigma.
Yes.
Okay? He was a outcast, so to speak, as it relates to the Republican Party. That's why, in the end, the Republican Party turned against him.
Yes.
Does everybody understand that? Okay, so the true, the leaders, let me say, of the Republican Party that really runs the party, they are the ones that pushed him on out the door in the end. Okay, so the Mitch McConnells, under a cloak and a disguise of partially supporting the president, lit the fire to cause what we have been talking about for the last 3 weeks. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
The uproar within the Republican Party. Now, he wasn't a direct proponent of the insurrection that tried to be, that happened as it relates to Washington, but he was the catalyst.
Yes, he was.
For the Republican Party leaders that did not agree with Trump anymore and said he's got to go. He is a cancer to our party, and if we do not deal with him, then we will not be able to get the House back in 2 years when we have the next Senate race.
Yes.
Okay, so this for them is about reestablishing their power in the Senate as it relates to what they want to do
their
concerning moving America forward. Okay, and black people are not in that equation. We are not in the equation of moving America forward. Now, something that I noticed when I looked at his first 100 days, the Green New Deal, and I go back to black people's labor, who built this country, okay, off the backs of the slaves. So when I go back and I look at how this country was established, okay, Constitution, and that Constitution was complicit with African slaves being the labor force, being the engine, being at that time the Green New Deal. Do you understand?
I got it.
Okay. We were considered what they are proposing now by way of a new format, bringing in a new format, which is really not new, okay? Because when you go back to the Franklin Roosevelt, and I keep referencing his administration, okay, part of the New Deal, okay, the Green New Deal is just some rewrites of his policy, and they're putting in energy efficient jobs instead of what he put in industrial jobs. You understand that?
So, Brian, when you say excuse me, but
Mm-hmm.
when you say the Green New Deal, are you saying that when we came, they brought us to this country, it was like we were the New Deal?
And that's just, yes, that's just an analysis for us, just to help us to
Yeah.
understand. We were the New Deal, okay? If you want to get rich, okay, the Constitution made it possible. The 1785 Land Act, for all of my brothers and sisters that want to look up this history, the 1862 Homesteaders Act, okay, made it possible for white settlers, and this was only for white people, blacks were not included in this, for white settlers to receive land from the government as long as they settled the land free.
Wow. Yes.
At least 160 acres were given away by the U.S. government under the 1785 Land Act and the 1862 Homesteaders Act. Now, catch this. Those that received the land also, by way of the land, had a right from the government also to be reimbursed for slaves that they were purchased to work the land. You understand?
You said that before.
Okay,
You told
right.
us
So,
that.
so the slave in itself was part of this country's New Deal.
Yes.
Okay?
I got it.
With those that were coming from Britain, coming from Europe, you understand?
Yes.
Though the New Deal was, if you come here and you settle land, we will make it possible for you to become very wealthy.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
We automatically will give you a job. We're automatically going to give you land. Okay? We're automatically going to reimburse you a portion of what you spend in reference to obtaining your slaves or creating your labor force. This was a business. Okay? So they were putting settlers in business by the thousands.
Yes.
And the business was slavery. Okay? All of the wealth generated, even the tax laws that were put in place concerning the monies from the cotton fields or crops that were made, okay? From the tobacco crops that were made, from the sugar crops that were made, all of these different tools and vehicles of making money. Even the tax laws were very lenient for those slave masters and those owners of plantations, which played into the process of them becoming very, very wealthy. That is why now, even today, you still see the Republican complaining about high taxes being placed on corporations.
The wealthy.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Or big corporations.
Yeah.
Okay, and wealthy business owners.
Yes.
That's why that fight still persists. It persists based on the laws that were put in place over 200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
At the inception of this country in the writing of this Constitution. Okay, so when we understand that, we have to realize that they're rehashing old things. There's nothing new that they will put in place as it relates to policies. Everything that they do is based off of old policies that they feel that worked
Yeah. And they want to.
for them
Right.
back then, and that established and made this country what it was. So when you hear people talk about the old America,
Yes.
okay, there's a difference between the old South. That terminology is used as well. The old South refers to the way that it was based on wealth being generated by way of slave labor.
Yes,
the
exactly.
old America is based on policies that were put in place, also based on slave labor, but progressed throughout that time frame of the early 17th century on up into the 18th century.
Yes.
Okay, early 18th
Yes.
century. So the progression was getting away from slave labor directly to going to slave labor indirectly. How did they do that? They did that by way of industrialization. Okay? That's where you see the whole concept of the cotton gin. Okay? Being able to pick the seeds out of the cotton, what the slave's job was. You understand? Being able to double and triple the amount of cotton that was picked and harvested. So we see that the age of industrialization begins to take place. And as the age of industrialization takes place, a blessing in disguise in some ways for the slave, because now the slave didn't have to work as hard. But by the same token, the slave was now then a lot of times put off the plantation and had nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
Okay, so we have to look at both sides of this thing. What will the Green New Deal do for us?
Nothing.
Okay, in regards to the policies, it will not do anything. Now, you say that from a standpoint of, we can be, we're not being harsh, but you say it from a standpoint of kind of being sarcastic, but literally that is true. Okay, because the Green New Deal that is being put in place deals with technology, okay, and deals with AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, black people are being left behind the curve as it relates to keeping up with technology by way of entering into the workforce. Okay, the mediocre, I don't want to say mediocre, but the important skilled labor jobs that we talked about, welding, construction, auto mechanics, all of those things that we need to be pushing our children back toward as a means of escaping the system, constructing a permanent lower class that they want to incarcerate in order to keep money flowing through a prison system, feeding the wealthy. Okay, so we have to understand that the whole attack against public schools right now is a way of continuing slavery on our children. We need to understand that. We need to understand that not only one reason that America has never dealt with the sin of slavery is because they have kept slavery in place by way of the system. Okay. One reason that they do not want to really give reparations, and we know that HR 40 bill, we talked about that briefly, okay, that needs to be reintroduced to on the Senate floor, but it needs to be more than just a study.
Right.
There's something that needs to be done. But the minute that they do that, that is the acknowledgement that slavery did happen, which they still haven't acknowledged, even though the history books recorded. You don't see it in our schools' history books.
No.
You don't. What we see in our school history books is the civil rights struggle. We do not see slavery in the history books. That is purposely done. It is purposely left out so that America can continue to say in 10, 15, 20 years, slavery never happened. We don't owe you anything because it never happened. How can we owe you something for something that never happened? We have to keep that in mind as black people. We cannot allow our past, and for black people that say slavery happened long ago, that is black people that are not conscious and aware of the fact that slavery did not go away. Slavery still exists with us today. Okay? It is still being promoted by way of government institutions. And I just gave you an example with the Clinton administration with what they did as it relates to policies, because slavery was sanctioned by the government, meaning that policies is what reinforced slavery. Let me give you another example. The black codes Okay? Jim Crow laws,
Yes.
all of those were governmental policies. The 1877 Compromise, with the reestablishing of the wealth in the South back to the plantation owner when the Union troops were pulled out, that was done by way of policies. We have to understand what is actually going on. So policies have always reinforced, okay, slavery as it relates to black people. So every governmental policy that has been put in place concerning black people has been, I said this at the start, has been to the detriment of black people, not the progression of black people. Okay? Now, we can talk about the black people that have broken through another time, but I want to deal specifically, like I said, we want to look at this American system, this American government need to acknowledge this sin and need to do something about it. Okay? The first 100 days doesn't deal with anything concerning black people. It further pushes back black people
To the bottom
of this system. Okay? And like I said, it is now recirculating black people and our black children, okay, back through a system that pushes them into institutional slavery by way of mass incarceration continuing. That's why every state now is looking at building larger prisons. You understand? Not only
Yes,
Alabama,
but other states too.
Just about every state,
Yes.
okay, is looking at how to transform their prison system, not by way of letting prisoners out, as discussed. Now, in Biden's first 100 days, he does have a criminal justice reform bill that is in that first 100 days. Okay? It mainly deals with those misdemeanor crimes, but it does not deal with the 1994 criminal justice policy that was put in place there again by Bill Clinton's administration, which Biden at that time was the chief executor that signed on to that crime bill. So there are certain facets that are revisited in that crime bill, but that are not addressed, that will actually deal with the problem of mass incarceration as it relates to black people. Okay, I need you all to understand that, okay? We have to understand that. So there again, we need to look at what happened. You know, why did America do what it did for 200 years prior to the releasing or the so-called abolishment of this crime and this massacre of other human beings, which millions, up into the 20s and the 30s, millions were either killed, lost their lives in some way, you know, and we're talking about just the actual transport from Africa to
America.
the North Americas.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about millions lost. And then we're talking about millions over here during the abolishment of slavery, during the 1863, January the 1st, signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. We know that there were 4 million at that time were released, but that does not include the count of the hundreds of thousands that had transitioned prior to that.
En route.
So no, I'm talking about that had died by way of slavery prior to the emancipation.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
That were actually incarcerated in what I would term as concentration camps called plantations. Okay? Prison systems called plantations. Okay? Notice that the prison boom did not begin until after emancipation. Okay? When the black codes were put in place in the South, when Jim Crowism was put in place in the South, you had an increase in the prison population, which you understand what the 13th Amendment states, that no person could be held against their will unless, and I'm paraphrasing this, a crime is committed and they are put in prison. That is what the 13th Amendment establishes. It establishes another system by being able to re-enslave black people. So that's what the prison system was created upon. It was created upon policies that were put in place that says that we can re-enslave black people by way of the prison system. So we have to understand what the prisons were set up as. They were set up and designated as slave camps again.
Yes.
You understand that? Which in those slave camps, guess what? The labor that is used to clean the highways, the labor that is used to make the metal tags, the labor that is used to harvest the crops is all free. It was a pseudo-slave system put in place to re-enslave African people. So what am I saying? This will continue to perpetuate itself as long as we allow this country to not address the ills, the terrorism, the dehumanization, all of these things that took place by way of our ancestors now affecting us. We are still disproportionately the lowest earning people group in this country. We earn less now than the Hispanics and any immigrant that is coming over here now. Black people do. We are still disproportionately the most uneducated group here. Most of the Hispanics' children are coming here and they have the upper hand because they're being taught English and they still have their mother country language in place, so they are bilingual. That is a step ahead of our children, because now everything, what I'm trying to show you, family, is how everything is being orchestrated to leave you behind. Okay, so we are still disproportionately the most uneducated group in this country. All right, we are still disproportionately the most unhealthy people group in this country. And that is due to a system as well.
Yes.
It is due to a health care system that was put in place by way of the big insurance conglomerates.
Yes. That's
okay,
so true.
Literally pricing out their services above what we could afford. You understand?
Yes.
So we cannot get the attention that every other group is coming over here. Up under immigration laws, immigrants can be seen.
Yes.
When others, when our children have been here, when the descendants of slaves have been here 200-300 years, when we cannot be seen. Okay? We are still disproportionately the most maligned group. Black people are hated more today than they were in the 60s and even in the 1800s, in the 1700s. Okay? We have to understand that our plight isn't getting better because we have bought into a false concept that a party is going to do something for us, or that here again, a president is going to be our savior. When no savior is coming for the black people, if we don't wake up and save ourselves, okay, if we don't begin to aggressively start pushing for policies that directly affect us and stop being okay with every other group being dealt with except for us. Every other group being named. It's just a shame, because when you read the first, and family, you got to go read this. When you read the first 100 days, he actually talks about in some of the executive orders, they talk about the mistreatment of the Pacific Islanders and the Asians. They talk about it, never once says the mistreatment of blacks. Never once addresses slavery, and never once addresses the systematic injustice that has been enacted and that has been exacted upon black people now for almost 500 years. Never once address policies that continue to push black people to the bottom. We're still disproportionately the people group that is most affected by the Fair Housing Act, dealing with low-income families.
Yes.
The Fair Housing Act did not work for us. What the Fair Housing Act did as it relates to black people was increased more ghettos. Okay. We are still disproportionately affected the most as a people group when it comes to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. What does that do? That makes it impossible to get a loan if you don't have a certain credit score. Most black people credit is shot before they can even establish credit. So what am I showing you? These policies, okay, that were put in place to keep you working as a slave. Okay? The Social Security system that we just became, and I say just because it's just in the 60s,
Yes.
okay, that black people began to be counted in their income, began to be counted toward Social Security. Prior to then, only white men and their widows could take part in this.
Right.
Okay, we have just started participating in that, and now they're talking about doing away with that. Okay, Social Security is based off of your income structure, mainly the last 5 years of your income structure. Okay? Black people that have poor health may not be able to work the last 5 years up until retirement.
That's exactly right.
Do you understand what I'm saying? But so what am I saying? Brian is saying that one thing compounds itself on the other till we get to the place to where we are considered to be obsolete in this American government. I said this before, that poor people were the invisible group. Okay? Black people are becoming, and we are literally, the invisible group. We are being replaced by way of promotion to become a mixed group rather than staying indigenously black. Once that happens, there again, the dismissal of slavery is made easy. The dismissal of the mistreatment of our ancestors is made easy. Okay? When we do not establish that something happened to us, so when we look at the ills of our community, we have to recognize that is not what was promoted in the early 16th century. And what was promoted is that African people are lazy people. We were so lazy that we built the country. Okay. So we know that all of those things are fictitious. Mm-hmm. There were so many stigmas, so many stereotypes placed on us. Those stereotypes are maintained today by way of systems that continue to hinder us from progressing. You understand what I'm saying? They are maintained by systems that are continuing to be placed upon our children to keep them substandard and to keep them stereotyped as inferior and having learning disabilities, meaning that they cannot learn at the same rate that other groups learn. The governmental system maintains a system of slavery for black people. I don't know why we think we're free because we could buy a little bling or own a house or a car. We're not free. No policies have directly affected the whole group of black people to where we can economically advance and make up monetarily, mentally, educationally, okay? All of those things, we are still years behind other groups. Like I said, even other groups that are coming over here since the early, 70s, 1970s. But you're talking about the Hispanic groups, when they really start migrating in force to the United States, was the early 70s. So we have to step back and take a look and realize that this thing called slavery, because it's not being taught in the schools, okay? Because we do not address it, because America wants to dismiss it. If we allow them to do that, then we allow our children to remain in slavery.
Well, Brian, I think so many blacks that I've talked to, what they feel, they made it out of a deprived environment. Mm-hmm. They were educated. They got good jobs, good careers. They had, were able to buy a home, educate their children, and now their children are doing well. I think that's the point, that people think they've arrived. And we really haven't.
No, we have not. Listen, there are always a few that are able and that are allowed to participate in the system. Okay? They're always going to be. It is a falsity to think that the system affords everyone the same opportunities. It does not. That is something that is promoted so that black people believe that other black people are lazy and don't work as hard as others. Okay, so now let me show you the psychological, but that's why we have to read books like Francis Fanon books, okay? Black Skin, White Mask. We have to read those type of books because it talks about the psychosis of black people and how we have been manipulated into thinking that we have been afforded opportunities, and that those opportunities that we were afforded, everybody else are afforded, which is not true. Okay? Why do I say it's not true? Take the ghetto child. Me being one by way of the projects of Montgomery that had a mother and a father that would not quit, that refused to quit. You understand what I'm saying? That I seen work 2-3 jobs, did whatever they had to do to make sure their children. Cannot everyone do that? When I say that everyone don't have the same opportunity, some people in that same ghetto that I grew up in, families that I knew were on welfare. They were single parent homes, not by choice, but by force.
Yes.
Because the government told them that the man cannot be in the home, and if he works, then the welfare will be cut off as it relates to the aid for dependent children for the children. Okay, that is a policy. That's why I say it goes back to that is a policy that enacts slavery. Okay? So oftentimes there wasn't a father in the home that was capable of maintaining a job. Why? because he could not make it through the education system.
Yes. Yes.
Because he had to work to take care of his parents.
Okay, his parents.
That's exactly.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And his parents were not educated. See, so what am I showing you? I'm showing you that people that do not have the same tenacity, the same, what we call the same will, there is something there. If we look back in their history that prohibits them from doing or having the same will as others. See, when you understand that and you understand, hold up, that person has a history that now leads him to be where he or she is, then you stop prejudging black people. But as long as you see black people the way the system makes you see them,
yes,
because you've gotten ahead, you were able to put your kids through school, your kids are doing fine, everybody else should be able to do the same thing.
And that's
no,
not the case.
That's not the case.
No, it's
you
not.
look at your history that allowed you to do that as opposed to someone else, it's drastically different.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so what am I showing you? I'm showing you that we cannot get caught up into the fact of prejudging our people.
Exactly.
Based on the government putting things in place that continues to promote that black people are lazy, that black people are barbaric, that black people, see, what the system does, it continues to dehumanize us. And the best tool to use to promote the dehumanization is other black people.
Yes.
Do you understand that?
I got it, yes.
Okay? So we have to understand that. We have to understand that part of the Willie Lynch theory, okay, was use black people
against each other.
That's right, to keep each other enslaved. Okay?
Yes.
Now, people don't believe Willie Lynch was real. I happen to believe he was real. Okay? Mm-hmm. When you go back and you look at his document in the 1700s.
When you know history.
Okay, and that's right, when you know history. Him being a Caribbean slave owner. Those things that he said, if the slave owner here in the North Americas, if they would put in place when he went to the plantation in Virginia in 1700s, he said, if you establish this amongst the slaves, first thing we want to do is put fear in them. We're going to break the strongest. We're going to break the one that everybody else look up to. All right? We're going to deal with the female also. That's the strongest. We're going to break her. The one that, so, and when you pit one slave against the other.
Yes.
Based off of their color, their skin pigmentation. If you put certain things in place, the slave will keep himself a slave. You don't have to worry about it. Okay? So now listen. This Willie Lynch theory was part of John Locke's. Okay, we have to go back and look at some of his papers that he put in place and established as it relates to a subordinate class that we now call slaves. Thomas Jefferson, when he pens the Declaration of Independence, okay, who is a student of John Locke, implements those things into the Constitution. So what? History repeats itself.
That's it.
Okay, when we understand history, it tells us everything. Not only do we need to know about our oppressor, but it tells us everything we need to know about us and who we are. You understand? So goes back to recognizing the institution that was called slavery. Notice I said the institution. And the reason that I said the institution is because anything that is put in place which is formed by the government is an institution. Prisons are institutions. Public schools are institutions. You understand what I'm saying? Hospitals are institutions. Okay? And they can all be used to promote the institution that was so-called abolished in 1863 as it relates to black people, but yet leave certain things in place to continue to enslave them. And they think because some of them do break through, we allow some of them to participate in the system. Okay, we do that for the purposes of eye candy. We do that for the purposes of aesthetics. We do that for the purposes that it looks good, that it promotes that America is the land of the free, the home of the brave. It promotes the melting pot theory, all of those. It promotes liberty. It promotes the lie.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
It promotes our agenda.
Yes.
And that is the same agenda that Abraham Lincoln had to struggle with as relates to the slave. We need to eradicate this problem. Something Abraham Lincoln said, as long as the slave is here, there's going to be an issue in America. The slave never left. You understand what I'm saying? The abolishment of so-called, we are still here. The descendants of the slaves are still here.
Yes, we are.
So there's still a problem. So that's why these systems are put in place. What am I showing you? I'm showing you how government institutionalizes things to keep us at the bottom and will not allow us to rise and be counted as equal with the rest of the American society. Okay? So when we talk about the great society, what great society when the majority of black people are still living in ghettos, still uneducated,
That's right.
still receiving poor health care, still, you see what I'm saying? Still cannot get jobs. What great society are we referring to? You know, what America is this when now civil rights laws that our ancestors died for, that our leaders were assassinated for,
We still fighting for it.
okay? Not only are we still fighting for it, but they're being used against us now.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
They're being used to promote every group except black people. And every group that's getting those rights, getting the attention needed based on those civil rights, at the same time, at the same time, pushes black people to the bottom that they're getting the civil rights when they're getting the civil rights. You understand what I'm saying? It creates a whole different paradigm, okay, by way of our struggle. Now they're saying every civil right that they have is being violated, which civil rights were supposed to only be for black people.
That's exactly right.
Just like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were only supposed to be in reference to black people. But now everybody uses those amendments, everybody uses those civil rights laws to push their issues ahead of black people's issues. Okay? So we have to revisit slavery. We have to deal with what it did that still affects the majority of black people, even though this nation is trying to create another people group that is not inherently the descendants of slaves, or even if they are only a fraction.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we have to become conscious of that. We have to become aware of that. And we have to refuse to allow it to happen. Because if we do allow it to happen, our children will have no place in this new America that they are creating. And they are creating a new America. They're creating a new America where black people will not exist. Colored people, okay, the new designation.
Yes.
Colored families will exist, but black people will be extinct. That is the new America that is being formed.
Do y'all hear that,
Okay,
family?
so we
YouTube, do y'all hear that?
we
I mean,
need
yes.
to wake up
Yes.
and, like they say, smell the proverbial coffee,
Yes.
because we are being left behind. Go and read whitehouse.gov. Read the documents. And let's talk more in detail about it. But we have to address this atrocity. If they don't address slavery, we could forget reparations.
Exactly.
Because you have no reparations without slavery.
You
Okay?
do not.
It's that simple. So we need to keep telling the story. The Jews never forget the Holocaust.
No, they don't.
And they do not allow you to forget the Holocaust. The Japanese never forget the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, that the Americans paid them reparations for. The Americans paid reparations for the Jews. We had nothing to do with the Holocaust, but the American government paid reparations to the Jews. Every year they get money from the American government for a Holocaust that we had nothing to do with. Every people group that have come to this country, and even if they haven't come to this country, if there's been some violation of their humanity, Americans have taken part in a reparations or restitutions form of payment to those people group, except black people.
Are we just
that
in
is
the dark? Do we just not get it?
We have closed our eyes blindly, and it's not only in America. See, we need to be fighting this fight worldwide. Every black person in Africa, in South Africa, need to be fighting this fight. You understand what? Central Africa need to be fighting this fight. The Caribbeans need to be fighting this fight. We all as black people should be fighting the fight of reparations, because slavery built the world.
It did.
Slavery went to every corner of the world. Black people were imported into every corner of the world. And a lot of times black people were there prior to their brothers, their cousins, their aunts, and their uncles coming from Africa. They were already in every corner of the world. You understand? So when we read books like They Came Before Columbus, okay, we understand that black people were already in the Americas. Okay, when you deal with the Folsom people and you deal with the Native Americans that they call Indians, we understand the migration pattern from Africa to this continent that they call Turtle, or this country, not a continent, country, that they call Turtle Island.
Oh, wow.
That we now call America. So we could go into all of that history. The point that I'm making is that we are old. Okay? We are old. And we're not only old in America, we're old all over. Okay? And if black people together say we're going to fight this fight all over the world, because you could not have had American slavery, without the participation of Rome, the Vatican, the church.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? You could not have had slavery without the participation of Europe, without the participation of the Portuguese, the Spaniards. You understand? Then the French, and we can go on. You understand? So, and then the Britain or the British. Yeah. So all of these countries were complicit in what we know today as chattel slavery. Okay? And we cannot lose sight. Black people cannot become dulled down to the point to where we say slavery doesn't matter. Because I guarantee you, the person that is saying that, if they look at their history and they look at their life, they are not better off Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I got you.
Than their counterparts.
Exactly, Brian.
So if you're not better off than your counterparts, you do not have the right to say that slavery doesn't matter anymore. Okay? If you're not making the same thing that your counterpart is making, working the same job, and I guarantee you no black that works a job makes more than his counterpart because you're working for the business owner who is the same color as your counterpart. Okay, so understand. See, we could talk about all of these corrective measures that's supposed to be in place.
Yes.
But corrective measures doesn't correct the mentality of the business owner that is the same color as your great-great-grandmother's oppressor. So, black people, my brothers and sisters, we got to get it together. We need to stop buying into these idioms and this propaganda machine that we have come up and that we have achieved something because a few of us. If you count the few blacks that so-called feel like they have made it, it's not even 3%. Do you understand what I'm saying? Of the black population, which makes up about 14 to 15% of these United States still today. I don't know. You understand what I'm saying? So what this country is saying is now that colored people are the majority, not black people. Black people are still between that 13 and 15% ratio. You understand? Yes. As it relates to the population. Now, if you want to lump yourself in a colored category just to be counted and get nothing, then you do that. Because as far as ethnicity, you're still looked at as a black person.
That's right.
Okay? And then out of the 15%, over 75% of the prison population is black. So what does that tell me? It tells me that we have made absolutely no progress at all. We are still in slavery, whether we want to admit it or not. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. We're still working for the man.
Yes.
And the man still controls what you bring home. The man can lay you off. I said this last week. Yes. The man can stop your check. The man is in control. And until we demand by law that the man put a security measure in place that will forever take care of our children and our children's children, we should not sleep. Do you understand?
I hear you. Yes.
Because it's not about us. It's about the generations coming after us, our children and our children's children that are not going to be able to compete with this new society in this new America that they are fashioning. You understand?
Yes.
To purposely delete them out of being able to participate. So I know we're going over time.
That's okay.
But anyway, family, do not let slavery slip your mind. I want to share with you 2 books. No better person to hear what slavery did than hearing it from a slave. Okay, so book today, When I Was a Slave, Memoirs from the Slave Narrative Collection. It's an easy read. It's not a thick book, but no better voice to hear than the voice of your ancestor. And then as it relates to the slave trade itself, The African Slave Trade by Basil Davidson. Good work. He did a good work. Okay. My brothers and sisters, I just want to encourage you. Okay. I've said enough. I've gone on my little you know.
Rant.
Yeah, not a rant.
Not a rant. Your factual basis.
Yeah,
okay.
pontifications.
Pontifications.
That's right.
That's
We do not call, when we are discussing and dialoguing about our needs, we don't call them rants.
No,
okay?
They're facts.
And not only that, why don't we call them rants, Brian? Because we are black people that are intelligent and we can critically think just like the next man. The word rant was used in reference to the slave. You understand?
Yes.
Okay? Being an ignorant, backward thinking person. So we don't use that word in our vocabulary. We don't say rant. Don't use the word rant. Okay? So I'm correcting Janice here. This is real life stuff.
Yes,
here.
it is.
And some things just gets my goat, so to speak.
And I'm
because no, you're not one of them, baby. You just, this is just for everybody.
Yes.
We belittle each other and don't even know what words were used and were not used to demean us. Okay? Black people, we are critical thinkers. I don't care if you're in the ghetto and you get upset about something. That black person in the ghetto, little do we know that the whole concept of Ebonics is an actual language that was very sophisticated in antiquity, that has carried over, passed down all the way to our children. So even now, when we look at our children and we see them speaking Ebonics, or we say they cannot speak the King's English. The King's English is the simplest and the most, I would say, uneducated form of language to speak. You do not have to be a scholar to speak the King's language. That's why English all over the world is so easy to learn. That's a lesson for us, okay, to understand. So we have to begin to see each other higher and understand that words mean something. When you start calling yourself what the oppressor called you, and when you start saying things about yourself that the oppressor said, you make yourself what the oppressor saw you as, which is a slave. You understand what I'm saying? We're not slaves. See, we call ourselves kings and queens, but yet we don't speak it. We don't understand what that whole concept is, because we continue to demean ourselves.
Yeah, you're right.
With the English of the oppressor, with the language of the oppressor, rather. You understand what I'm saying? So that's how that is.
Yeah, that's why this younger generation that's coming up now, they're completely different. And we're not changing them. They're not buying it. And hopefully they will do what we should have done.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we, I believe that we have to, as black people, we have to change our mentality as a group collectively on how we deal with each other, how we see each other. You understand what I'm saying?
Definitely.
See, my mom used to say, we could talk about each other, but can't nobody outside of our family talk about you.
That's exactly right.
You understand?
Yes.
We can fight amongst each other, but nobody outside of the family better come into our fight. Because if they do, they got to deal with the family. You understand what I'm saying? We let this government separate us. We let this government stereotype us, profile us, call us certain things. You understand what I'm saying? You get words like super predator coming out of the mouth of a woman that wrote a book called It Takes a Village. That's taken from an African concept. You understand what I'm saying? And at the same time, she puts her mouth on black people to call them no more than barbarians. You understand what I'm saying? And we allow people to become our president and our Lord and our overseer that stood in a school and called our children roaches. And our memory, we forget everything. We're so forgiving by nature. And that's another thing I have to deal with, is the spiritual concept and how we've strayed from that. But anyway, we forget and forgive everything to the point that we are left behind. To the point to where we're not angry enough to do something. Yeah,
to change our condition.
absolutely. Okay, so we're done. Okay, sweet.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. Appreciate everybody that came on. Suzanne Fuller, so good to see you. Love you, my sister. Patricia May, thank you, my sister. Phyllis, as always, thank you. We love you guys. Join us next week. We'll be here same time. Hopefully we won't be this late, but thank you guys for joining us tonight. We love you, and we have a wealth of knowledge to share with you. Love you guys, and see you next Sunday, 6:30. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. Love you for tolerating Brian again.